Okay, the list of participants has plateaued, so I'll begin my housekeeping notes and then we will move on with the evening. And as folks join, they can just tune in to whatever we're up to at the moment. So I want to just begin by welcoming everybody. My name is Jenna. I work at Nature NB. Nature NB is one of the organizations co-hosting this debate tonight, and we are co-hosting it with UNB Sustainability. So we have some folks from Nature NB and UNB Sustainability on the call as well, keeping an eye on the chat, helping out with any technological issues that may arise, things like that as we go along. I know we're probably all quite used to platforms like Zoom by now, but this is the webinar version of Zoom, which means you can see us, but we can't see you. That just helps us save on bandwidth because there will be quite a few people in the call tonight. You'll notice maybe a few new features that you've never seen before. So there's a feature called Q&A. Usually this would be a chance for you to ask the presenters questions. However, all the questions for tonight have been predetermined. So if you have any concerns or other things like that, we ask that you put them in the chat because we won't be answering questions in the Q&A during the debate. There's also an interpretation feature. So if you would prefer to listen to tonight's events in French, you can just click on interpretation and switch your language to French and everything will be translated for you. And just one final note, recording is in progress of this call because we will be hosting it on our YouTube channel for streaming for anybody who wasn't able to make it tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Dr. Don Wright, who is going to carry us through the evening.
Thanks very much, Jenna. Welcome everyone to this debate. It's one of 100 debates on the environment taking place across the country tonight and tomorrow night in French. I will begin by acknowledging that New Brunswickers live, work, and gather on the traditional unceded territories of the Wolastoqua, the Mi'kmaq, and the Pescatawamukati, three nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. If you're joining our Zoom call from outside of Fredericton or even from outside of New Brunswick, we encourage you to note in the Zoom chat those traditional territories on which you currently reside. You can find out more at native-land.ca. My name, as Jenna said, is Donald Wright, and I am a professor in UNB's Faculty of Arts. And I very much want to thank the debate organizers for inviting me to moderate tonight's debate. And I especially want to give a huge shout out to the candidates who've joined us. I was joking earlier in the pre-chat that I don't have the stomach for departmental politics or faculty politics. So I really admire people who have the courage of their convictions to put their name on a ballot and knock on doors and put up signs and ask for people's support. So win or lose, good on you. The format of tonight's debate is as follows. Candidates will begin by introducing themselves. Then candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question unless otherwise specified. An order of candidates has been randomly generated, and the first candidate to speak will alternate with each question. Candidates will also have time at the end to offer their closing remarks. A couple of final points. All questions have been selected ahead of time, so questions asked in the Zoom chat will not be addressed, but attendees are free to contact the candidates on their own time if they have more specific questions or concerns. The chat is moderated, and we have a zero tolerance policy for hate speech, personal attacks against candidates or other participants, or any comments determined by the chat moderator to be offensive, violent, or abusive in any way. Anyone using this language will be removed at the chat moderator's discretion. Statements of protest or disagreement, however, are permitted. Finally, this debate is being recorded and will be available for streaming on Nature NB YouTube page on September 10th. And you can watch it there again if you want to follow up on a candidate's comments. Now, before I invite the candidates to make their introductory statements, I will read an introductory statement from one of the candidates who was not able to attend, and that was Andrea Johnson from the Conservative Party. She writes, "Thank you for the privilege of sharing some thoughts this evening. I'm sorry to be unable to join what will surely be a lively, informative, enlightening, and respectful debate. My respects to Mr. Wright, this evening's moderator, and to the other candidates. The people of our riding, as we know, range from those who appear to have everything to those who have clearly nothing. Over the past several weeks, practically every day, I have spoken with mothers, fathers, seniors, children, teens, young mothers, couples starting out life together, seniors spending their twilight years together, residents of long-term care, people living rough. I've been hearing from IT professionals, blacksmiths, loggers, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, folks from all walks of life, and those who want to take part, people from all over the world who have come to call the Fredericton area home. The people in our Fredericton riding care very deeply about their families, one another, our environment, and the future, if our conversations at the door are any indication. This week, our children will be returning to school, and our next generation of leaders in humanities, the sciences, and social justice will be starting preschool. Let's all keep repeating the message of back to school safely. Over the next several days, I believe people will give more attention to the federal election and what it means for them, their families, their communities, and the future of our nation. I encourage folks to examine our conservative plan to secure Canada's future online and learn more about our leader, Aaron O'Toole. Enjoy the debate. Now, I will call upon, again, the order is determined well in advance. I will call upon Nicole to introduce herself.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a real thrill to be here. Well, of course, I was looking forward to this debate because this is why I joined the Green Party, was to get into these kind of discussions. I'm a constitutional law professor at UNB. I teach a whole range of courses, including criminal law and evidence, Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations, and Canadian federalism. Now, how does that have to do with the environment? Well, believe it or not, environmental regulation is under criminal law. So that's part of my criminal law course. We're going to talk a little bit about enforcement and regulations and whatnot in the course of the evening here. That's a little preview. In June, when the opportunity came to put my name forward for the nomination, I guess that's a ding. Okay, I'll just tell this story quickly then. My students from my Canadian federalism class said, maybe it's time to stop teaching Canadian federalism and start doing Canadian federalism. So here I am, folks.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Brandon.
Hi, I'm Brandon Kirby. I graduated in 2008 with the Bachelor of Arts degree, concentration in philosophy. Anytime you study philosophy, you have to have a plan B. So I wrote my certification, my investment funds course, wrote a tax consultation course with H&R Block, and I worked part-time in the financial industry while I was going to school, and then worked full-time once I graduated. Eventually worked my way into the Cayman Island hedge fund industry, and I've got a startup. I'm trying to get back into it as an anti-money launderer, where we go after sex traffickers and terrorists who are trying to launder their money through hedge funds in the Cayman Islands. I've got a 30% rate of return last quarter in terms of my green tech investments. I had 117% per annum before the last election, and I sit on the board of directors for SGI and Smart Grid Innovation Network, where we're trying to transition Canada to clean energy. That's the resume that I bring forward. I want to talk about things from more of a financial perspective for the next couple of hours.
Thanks very much, Brandon. Jenna, did June able to get on the chat?
Yes, June is here.
Oh, great. Okay, June, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, my name is June Patterson. I work at a grocery store. I'm 23 years old. I'm running for the Communist Party of Canada. I'm running because I believe that the single largest barrier to climate justice and truly confronting climate change is capitalism itself. The capitalist system has caused the extinction of species, empties the forests, extracts mines, fracks. It releases externalities in the form of pollution. We all pay the price for it. And I'd also like to note that the military is a very large polluter, even in Canada. of all emissions released by the federal government, 59% are released by the Department of Defense in the form of emissions. And I think I'd like to bring that perspective to this debate tonight.
Thanks very much, June. Next is Jenica.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenica Atwin. I'm more committed than ever to the environment, to environmental stewardship, to Indigenous reconciliation, which goes hand in hand in addressing the climate crisis. I've been, accused of abandoning my principles and leaving the Green Party and joining the Liberals, but really it's the contrary, that upholding my values and beliefs is what made me transition. There is no time to waste. The window of opportunity is shrinking, and I have to go where I can be the most effective for Fredericton and where I can meaningfully address the climate crisis. I'm running into the fire because my children, your grandchildren, our futures depend on it. This is absolutely a pivotal moment in Canadian history, and I want to be on the right side of history. I did the work in Ottawa, writing letters, questioning ministers, late night parliamentary debates, tabling petitions, holding press conferences. Fredericton, we need a seat at the table. We need to ramp up our urgency. We need to deliver, and that's really what I'm trying to do. We need a future we can count on, and I am so willing to do the work. Thank you so much to the NB Nature Trust and to UNB Sustainability, as well as GreenPAC.
Thanks so much, Jenica. And the final person is Shawn. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say thank you to Jen and Nature NB Trust and Dr. Wright. Thank you for overseeing us. This is kind of an uphill curve for me, so I'm here mainly to learn. But what I can tell you is, as the Conservative candidate quoted a nursery rhyme, that shows you what the Conservatives know about the environment, or what they think. The climate is real, not a fairy tale. It's something that has to be dealt with now, as stated in our platform. So we can either choose between the two governments who have had the choice to prevent this all from happening, or we can go with a party that has a plan in place. So the choice is the people. For better choices, you got to make different decisions.
Thanks very much, Shawn. And quickly, I should say, I'm referring to people by their first name, Jenica, Nicole, June, Shawn, Brandon, because I think that's what first I was told to do that, but I think that's also, it makes it for a less formal atmosphere. And so please, you can refer to me as Don, not Mr. or Doctor. Okay, so we're going to move right now into the first question. And these questions, again, are provided in advance. These questions are provided by GreenPAC, and it deals with the climate, the nature, and the pandemic. COVID-19 has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, the human impact on nature, and the rise of global pandemics like SARS, Ebola, and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases. Scientists generally agree that COVID originated in other animal species and spread to humans in large part because of the pressures on these species brought on by land use changes and unsustainable consumption. These factors are also leading causes of climate change. We are asking 3 yes or no questions that each deal with immediate measures the government can take to address these interlinked crises to protect the health of Canadians as we emerge from the worst of this pandemic. Please keep your answer to 1 minute or less for all 3 questions. So question 1A, will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030? Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I'd like to see is tort reform. So what we have is a situation where somebody can cause ecological catastrophe, and then they can they can do this in the name of some sort of a business, write themselves a massive bonus, retire from the company, and then the company's faced with the liabilities, and then the company can then declare bankruptcy and nobody's held accountable. So what I'd like to see is criminal responsibility for things of that nature, especially with respect to plastic pollution going into the oceans, with respect to pesticides. There's a number of areas where I'd like to see some sort of a reform. on that area. So what we need is not a legislative approach. We have to eliminate public good legislative protection of polluters so that the judiciary, a judge, can then make a judgment where somebody is then held criminally responsible for damage to the environment.
Thank you, Brandon. June, the screen is yours.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030?
Yes. The Communist Party has a comprehensive plan. We believe the only plan presented among the political parties running this election that will actually be able to tackle the climate crisis as it stands. We want to immediately cancel the Energy Saguenay LNG project, Coastal GasLink, Trans Mountain Expansion, Line 9, Line 5. We want to end all fossil fuel related development now and immediately begin a process of phasing out fracking and the tar sands. We want to reduce military emissions using a 75% cut to military spending. Now, this would be redirected to search and rescue, emergency disaster response capability, and of course, to social spending on health, education, childcare, job creation. And we want to impose strong penalties on polluters who break the law, not just our carbon tax schemes that they can pay their way out of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, June. Jenica.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, yes, I will commit to developing the credible plan to protect and reverse nature loss. There is in the platform the commitment to protect 30% of land, fresh water, and ocean by 2030 with the milestone of 25% by 2025 as well. And I know, I mean, I was in opposition. I criticized the Liberal government just as much as anyone else, but since they came into government, they have protected from 1% of oceans, now protecting 14%. So there is growth being made. There are gains being made. It's important to focus on some of the positive things as well. But I want to be there to really continue to push it. So there is an ambitious plan to include 10 new national parks, 10 new national marine conservation areas, 15 new national urban parks. So this is all part of a protection strategy, conservation strategy, and ensuring that all Canadians have access to beautiful green spaces in our wonderful vast country. So thank you very much. Definitely committed to that.
Thanks, Jenica. Shawn, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Short answer, yes. We need to fight the climate crisis like we want to win. The climate is putting everything we value at risk. As far as our platform, basically, we've got a plan to fight the climate crisis and win, cut emissions by more than half, and meet the 1.5-degree target that scientists say is necessary to prevent catastrophe. Create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs, investing in clean energy, energy-efficient, affordable homes, electric transit, zero-emissions vehicles, and retrofit buildings across the country.
Thanks very much, Shawn. Nicole.
Great. Well, you can check out the Green Party platform with respect to developing a credible plan. And people generally get excited about new legislation. However, the usual problem is the enforcement of that legislation. And that's where we've seen the Conservative government and the Liberal government for decades now not actually enforce existing legislation. I'd propose, of course, that the environment is federal jurisdiction, either under the criminal law power or under peace, order, and good government. And they've just been hesitant to get into enforcement when it comes to interfering with the provinces. We've had a very weak federal government approach to this issue for decades now. That absolutely needs to change, because once you start talking about criminal law and you start talking about peace, order, and good government, you start talking about enforcement mechanisms that are serious, regulatory sanctions, and including jail time. That's the kind of thing we need the federal government to actually flex its muscle to enforce existing legislation, and then look at the Green Party platform for some new ideas. We've got lots of them.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Moving on to question 1B. Will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law? June. You're muted, June.
Sorry, I would commit to that. Yes, the Communist Party. We want to replace existing cap and trade and carbon tax schemes with strict legal limits for pollution and hard caps on emission. And we want to see jail terms and large fines for people who violate that. Another aspect of bringing down emissions is nationalization of energy and natural resources. In public hands, under democratic control, we can very easily lower emissions because there's no need to regulate a private entity. We can immediately shut down very bad polluters and get to net zero emissions by 2050 and reach our Paris Climate Accord goals.
Thank you, June. Jenica.
Thank you. So this one for me is on a personal level. Yes. What's in the Liberal platform is the 40 to 45% of the 2005 levels by 2050 or 2030. And really, I've spent enough time with my dear friend Elizabeth May to know that we need to push that to that 60% target. And again, this is really what I'm trying to do, is to go in there and be a strong voice, sitting at the table, convincing my colleagues that we have to be more aggressive, that the urgency piece has to be front and center, that we can't see kind of incremental gains that are too small to really feel the impacts now, because we're experiencing, again, devastating weather patterns, highest temperatures recorded in Canadian history. So it's critically important that we push this forward. So from our platform, it does say 40 to 45%, but on a personal level, I am absolutely committed to pushing that to 60% by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenica. Shawn.
Thank you. And yes, the Liberals are better than the Conservatives, but yes, NDP has a plan for this. Our plan to fight the climate crisis and win, however, by cutting emissions by more than half to meet the 1.5 degree target that scientists say is necessary to prevent catastrophe. Create hundreds of thousands of good paying jobs by investing in clean energy, energy efficient, affordable homes, electric transit, zero emissions vehicles.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Nicole.
Yeah, it was Elizabeth May who pushed for that, the idea of 60%. It's nice to see the Liberals kind of moving a little bit along that lines, but folks, that's nowhere where we need to be. If you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the recent report from the UN, we have 8 years to turn this around. So these kind of numbers are really, I'll use an old-timey metaphor here, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic when the iceberg and the ship are colliding, right? We need to not only reduce emissions, but we need to make them negative, which means we need to start really investing in technology that's going to really increase our ability to capture carbon and carbon sinks, and use all sorts of every policy lever we've got at our disposal. And talking about numbers, 60%, 45% or whatever, it is certainly not enough to do what we need to do quickly.
Thank you, Nicole. Brandon, you're the final speaker.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about what a free market solution on this looks like. When the Dow goes up, when the stock markets go up, green tech goes twice as high. When the stock markets go down, green tech goes twice as low. And the reason for that is it has to do with the volatility, the beta, the standard deviation of green tech. When people have a lot of money in their pocket, they can spend it on things like electric vehicles or solar paneling or geothermal. When people don't have a lot of money, they become very reclusive. So carbon taxes, what happens? Carbon's an inelastic good, according to economists. It's like milk. It doesn't matter if milk is $2 a liter or $4 a liter. People spend the same amount of money on milk. So carbon taxes don't, you have an extra 12 cents per liter, 30 cents per liter. People still drive from A to B and on weekends C. But when people have more money in their pocket, when we can have tax cuts for things like solar paneling or electric vehicles, this is a lever that actually impacts consumer decision-making behavior. So what I want to offer are tax cuts for green technology.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Moving on to question 1C. Will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels? The first speaker is Jenica.
Thank you. And absolutely, yes, we have to push all levels of government on this particular aspect. So certainly there's a commitment. And again, I've seen rapid change happen over the last couple of years as far as this consensus building around addressing the climate crisis. So already the commitment to end fossil fuel subsidies has been bumped up to 2023. 2 years sooner than expected. So I'm hopeful, I really want to communicate that part of this debate as well, is that we tend to get really bogged down. It can be looming, it can be dark, but there are solutions that exist and we're getting there. So I'm really happy to say that that commitment to end fossil fuel subsidies is by 2023. So right around the corner. And again, I just think that it's nice to see this consensus across party lines. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenica. Shawn, you're next.
Hi, thank you. Nicole is right. Conservatives deny climate crisis is real. The Liberals act like it's not real. Trudeau talks a lot, but doesn't act. Do we want someone who talks or just someone who means it? Now, I'm still getting up to speed with this. This is a big learning curve for me. So as soon as I get to Ottawa, I'm taking Matthew Green for a drink and hopefully he can bring me up to speed.
Okay, thank you very much, Shawn. Nicole.
Yeah, Greens have been pushing this for 20 years. We've really got to phase out the oil and gas industry. We also have to phase out the associations like the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers from lobbying the government. That has caused a lot of problems and is the biggest reason why governments have been so slow to make any kind of change in this area, because money talks and political lobbies talk. I'd also like to say the first rule when you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. The Liberals have spent over $20 billion in the last 3 years subsidizing the petroleum industry. This is an industry that should be phased out, not reinforced by public taxpayer dollars. They shouldn't be buying pipelines. We should be investing that money in green, renewable, clean energy.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Brandon.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that this is the strongest argument that I have for libertarianism. Everything else is downhill from here. This is my strongest point. The government literally steals the money you make via taxation, and they give it to people who poison the air that you breathe. Nothing about that is hyperbole. Nothing about that is exaggeration or falsified. We steal the money you make and we give it to people who poison the air you breathe. With respect to the subsidies, I have to disagree with some of Nicole's numbers. Last year alone, we had $18 billion going to fossil fuel companies. That's 5 times worse than Stephen Harper. The Liberals are 5 times worse than Stephen Harper's government on this. Now, people say, okay, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is this. When I invest in geothermal, the biggest obstacle that we come across are the subsidies. Not only do we have to develop the infrastructure for geothermal, but we then have to go on to compete with the variable costs. These subsidies are the biggest thing preventing us from going green. It's the #1 issue that we have to tackle. We have to cancel the subsidies.
Thank you, Brandon. June, you're the final speaker to this question.
I don't have to do any convincing because our party has never supported subsidies to any private organization or company ever. Any fossil fuel development that would happen, and it wouldn't happen under our watch, would be publicly owned and for the public good. I agree, we need to end all subsidies to polluters, mining companies, fossil fuel companies. The Liberals may be 5 times worse than Stephen Harper, but in BC, where the NDP is currently in government, subsidies to oil companies have doubled, and they are now opening up more tracts of land to old growth logging. I think we need to look at the record of all 3 of these parties in government when it comes to subsidizing polluters and other bad actors.
Thanks very much, June. Okay, you guys are doing great, by the way. You're keeping to your allotted time. Your questions are short and to the point. It's making my job a lot easier. Okay, so question number 2, dealing with the recovery, touching on jobs and racism and justice. So this is the question: will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? What would you do to address how women and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crises? The first speaker is Shawn.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Canadians have sacrificed enough and shouldn't have to pay for the recovery. Billionaires and corporations that profited should. We need a prime minister who stops protecting them and who fights for us instead. We've learned all about Justin in the last 6 years. He looks like he cares, but he says he'll do the right thing, but doesn't seem to be an intention of doing it. We need to fight the climate crisis like we want to win. The climate crisis is putting everything we value at risk.
Thanks very much, Shawn. The next speaker is Nicole.
I mean, this is an easy one, yes, of course, but then how do you do it, right? How do you actually get a handle on what the disproportionate effects are? Now, programs such as a guaranteed livable income, which, a few years ago before the pandemic, people would have thought that was not possible, right? There's no money for it. There's no tolerance for it. Well, we've seen it actually has worked to keep people afloat during a time of crisis. So we can do that in the terms of maybe formal equality, right? Keep everybody kind of a baseline so that they're not feeling so much anxiety about how to pay rent or just cover the basics such as food at the grocery store. However, how do you adjust a program like that that's uniform in its application to adjust for the unique lived experience of women or other minorities? Well, you first of all, unlike Stephen Harper, who refused to quote unquote commit sociology, you need to actually do some sociology and study a little bit to fashion programs so that they can adjust on a needs-based basis to really address the concerns, so you can raise those people up, because simply writing checks, even across the board, leads to disproportionately uneven health, right? So you can start doing that, but then you have to build into policy some way to adjust for unique lived experience. And that's where we've seen a little bit of experimentation during the pandemic. I'd like to continue that onwards so we can really lift people up and give everybody at least an equal chance at participating in society in a just way.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Brandon, will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? And if so, how?
Thanks a lot, Don. We have to take a look at what the root causes are, because libertarians, we don't do class-based analysis. We don't say, okay, this is how this is disproportionately impacting so-and-so. But if somebody is being disproportionately impacted by climate change, then what the solution is, in my judgment, and the judgment of libertarians all across the world, is we have to address climate change. So what we want to do is identify some of these economic opportunities that exist, because we're in a situation where moral suasion has not worked. It hasn't worked to say this is the situation we're in. Somebody just asked a wonderful question. What do you do personally to lessen your impact on the environment? Well, for myself, I eat vegan. I don't drive a car. I use a manual push mower. I don't use a dryer. So there's lots of things that I like to do personally, and this is how I like to lessen it. And we have to say, okay, these are your principles as a politician. Are you committed to this, or is this just some sort of a virtual signal? Is this some sort of virtue signaling where you're not actually committed? Because sometimes we can vote somebody into office and we find out that their principles aren't actually genuine. So we have to have people into office. We have to be identifying economic opportunities, and this is how we address the climate change. And if this has a disproportionate solution or a disproportionate beneficial outcome for women and minorities, all the better.
Thank you very much, Brandon. June, the screen is yours.
Yes, of course. The Communist Party, we fight for a people's recovery. As Shawn said, we didn't cause this crisis, and the working class shouldn't be the one to pay for it. The profiteers who have, made away with billions and billions of dollars in the wake of this pandemic, they should be the ones to pay for it. We need a huge publicly funded investment to create better paying jobs, for everybody. We need to bring in legislation to write it into law that we need to guarantee the rights of women, Indigenous people, and people with disabilities have equal access to social, medical, and educational facilities. We need to increase public funding to abortion and reproductive rights groups and facilities. Increase public funding to crisis centers and battered women's homes and other such things to combat the increase in domestic violence that we've seen during the pandemic, during the lockdown. A big part of this question is how are we going to bring reconciliation into this? Indigenous people have stewarded this land for hundreds, thousands of years. We need to have a new relationship with the Indigenous nations on this continent. We need to bring an immediate just settlement to all currently active land claims, and have full Indigenous veto and consultation on all development on their lands.
Okay, thank you very much, June. The final speaker to this question is Jenica. Would you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? And if so, how?
Thank you very much. And yes, I will absolutely commit to a green and just pandemic recovery. I've kind of been in the thick of it for the last, almost 2 years, traveling back and forth to Ottawa, virtual participation as well, to really discuss these issues. And it comes from our constituency offices right across the country. It's not a question of if women or marginalized groups were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. It's absolutely the case. I can tell you time and time again, fielding the phone calls, the emails, requests that come into our office. And so there's absolutely been a commitment on behalf of the Liberal government as well. Even in opposition, we were working collaboratively on this approach because there was a collective recognition that more has to be done, to use the gender-based analysis, for example, to really look at how women in particular have been impacted by the pandemic. Women's work is an example of that as well. Linguistic lens as well, lens of poverty. Absolutely, Nicole, a guaranteed livable income is something that could allow so many Canadians who are just in survival mode to kind of take that collective sigh of relief and really focus on some of the lifestyle changes that are required for us all to address the climate crisis as a collective. So there's lots of pieces to this as well. I was a joint seconder to my friend Lenore Zan's bill on environmental racism as well. I think it's high time we have that as a really robust discussion about what that means. A lot of people have a misunderstanding of what that might look like, but it's very clear that Indigenous people, for example, have been disproportionately impacted as well by the climate crisis. I'm thinking of boil water advisories. I'm thinking of communities that have mercury contamination from mining and extraction. So it's very clear that there's so much that we need to do, and in applying these lenses to legislation and having those robust discussions when we're drafting legislation, this is how we can address it in Canadian society, as well as role modeling and working collectively with provincial and municipal governments as well. So it's really an all hands on deck approach, but absolutely I'm committed to a green and just pandemic recovery. And we're not through this yet, but it's really going to take all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenica. Okay, that finishes question number 2 on recovery. We are now moving to toxics and toxins. Question number 3, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The Act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority? And the first speaker to that will be Nicole.
Yeah, great, thanks. Again, people get very excited about reintroducing legislation when we really have an enforcement problem. Stephen Harper cut the Law Commission of Canada. So when it comes to putting together more than just tinkering amendments, we've not really had the capacity at the federal level to do anything big and comprehensive. So we've got a lot of areas of legislation, the CEPA being one of them, that needs a major overhaul, not just tinkering. And one of the problems with private members' bills or going after something like glyphosate is that it's just going to tinker at the edges, and companies like Monsanto are going to say, great, well, we'll just find a new chemical, slightly different, patent it slightly differently, call it something different, and we're back in business. So we really need a comprehensive overhaul of the legislation. That's one thing for sure. We need to appropriately fund the law reform commissions that need to put the work into drafting that kind of bill instead of leaving it up for incremental amendments here and there. The other thing, I've been involved with a climate litigation action network for a couple of years. And what we really need to be talking about is a right to healthy environment. So if you look at our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 7 talks about life, liberty, and security of the person. The understanding of that needs to be expanded to talk about the right to a healthy environment. So a positive right. So the right to clean water, the right to healthy forests. So this is a much bigger conversation. We also need to look significantly at what it means to be treaty people with reciprocal mutual obligations, right, between settler and Indigenous communities, and whether that be rights or treaty obligations, that needs to be put into the mix as well. So this is a lot bigger than just kind of revamping pre-existing legislation. What we need is something much bigger, a fundamental paradigm shift.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Brandon, the floor is yours.
It's a fascinating question. One of the things that I'd like us to take a look at is, again, tort reform. So you take a look at what happened with health and safety, for example. We had a health and safety situation in Nova Scotia. There was a mining collapse in the early 1990s. It wound up killing between 20 and 25 people. And nobody was held responsible for that. We had a shift where people could be held criminally liable. It's no longer the situation where you would have a manager that cuts themselves a big bonus and then the corporation gets to declare bankruptcy, but the person who made the decision to cut corners on health and safety gets held criminally liable for their actions. I'd like to see shifts like this. I'd like to see, yes, an elimination of public good legislation that just protects polluters, so that we can have not just a legislative penalty imposed on people, because quite frankly, governments come, they go, they're susceptible to lobbyists, where judges are far less susceptible. But I'd also like to see a situation not where criminals, or not where corporations rather, are held liable, but for the decision makers behind those corporations are held liable for the damage that they do to all of us. It's Nicole was saying, it's a Section 7 right. You have the right to life. If the planet is rendered uninhabitable, that's a problem. That's a violation of your charter rights. And people have to be held criminally responsible for this. And right now they're not. Corporations are held responsible for it, but the individual decision makers are not. And this is a complete violation of a free market society. So thank you. It's a wonderful question.
Thank you very much, Brandon. June, will you support getting a bill on toxic substances reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority?
Yeah, I would definitely. Honestly, I'm not very familiar with the 1999 Environmental Protection Act, but hearing that it hasn't been updated since then probably means it needs updating. This isn't, of course, just an issue of legislation or enforcement either. Big picture, we need to push back against the power of these large corporations and wealthy individuals and families that bend the law in their favor. As has been noted by Nicole, it's not necessarily that we have a lack of legislation, we have a lack of enforcement. And I'd like to ask why aren't these laws being enforced? And it's because these large corporations and wealthy individuals hold large amounts of influence in our society, and we need to push back against that because, it is in many of their financial interests to continue pollution, and it's not in the interests of anybody else for them to. And if we continue to allow these bad actors to, have such huge influence over our society and to influence our laws and decisions, it'll be too late. So while yes, I support introducing new legislation to protect the health and safety of Canadians, it also needs to be part of a broader program to push back against the power of corporations in Canada.
Okay, thanks very much, June. Jenica, will you support the reintroduction, the strengthening, and the making of a top legislative priority, a bill on toxic substances?
Absolutely, I would. It was important to be involved in the discussions around this bill. It was sad to see it die. It will come back. It will be improved. And I'm particularly interested again in enshrining the right to a healthy environment, which is the main focus of this updated piece of legislation. I take the points that Nicole has been making about enforcement as well, which could be included in that amendment process. And I think it's something we need to look at. We do have lots of legislation, and it's time that we really ensure that it is enforced across the country. I will also say, like a comment about private members' bills, I did put one forward to ban glyphosate and update the Pest Control Act. I'm very proud of that. I think it's something, it got a conversation going. It started a national dialogue. I had conversations with the health minister, and I'm working on a commitment to have a new study looked into glyphosate use as well. There is a lot of misunderstanding about its uses across the country. Many of my colleagues in other provinces were actually shocked to find out about how it's used in forestry applications here. It's used by industry. There's mostly a focus on agriculture in other parts of the country. So there's still a need for us to get this conversation going. So I'm very proud of my private members bill for being able to achieve that. I hope to retable this bill. I do think there is, importance in bringing that forward. So again, it's going to take a lot of, coordination and collaboration across party lines, but I'm seeing that appetite. I'm seeing people's, real focus this time on really wanting urgency and to address the situation. And, here in New Brunswick, we have incredible, green spaces. We have lots of trees. We have ocean access. We have rivers and streams, and yet we have the highest cancer rates. We have multiple sclerosis that is just much higher than anywhere else in the country. We have Crohn's and colitis issues. A lot of these can be connected back to, I believe, herbicide and pesticide use, and that's really what I would like to include and infuse in the conversations. So much more to come on this. Very passionate about it. Absolutely, I will commit to seeing SEPA return to the legislative table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenica. Shawn, you're the final person for this question. Will you support getting a bill on toxic substances reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority?
Yes, absolutely. And June, I'm right with you. I'm busy taking notes and learning from all the people who know all this stuff. I do know this, and my daughter, she's 16, she certainly brings it to my attention about how important all this stuff is with passion. And we can look at, it's no fairy tale. Mr. Trudeau's, I'm referring to my notes, his hypocrisy is staggering. One day, he declared a climate emergency. The next day, he approved a pipeline. Excuse me. He pretends to be a climate leader, but bought a pipeline. He gave big oil and gas billions in fossil fuel subsidies last year alone and let big polluters off the hook. And O'Toole, his so-called plan won't make any difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Okay, that ends question number 3. Question number 4, on Indigenous rights. Indigenous peoples play a critical role in environmental solutions. Will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Will you invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas? The first speaker is Brandon.
It's an interesting concept. What I think is fundamental to reconciliation is the concept of poverty reduction. That's one of the passions of mine. What does somebody have their somebody unmuted? Okay, there we go. What I'd like to see is a scientific appraisal, because we can study scientifically how poverty gets reduced. For example, we can take a look at malnutrition. We can take a look at dehydration. We can take a look at lifespans, rates of spread of disease. We can take a look at architectural integrity. We can take a look at child labor, and we can measure these things through independent mechanisms and find out that it is, in fact, the economic policies of India circa 1991 that resulted in dramatically reduced poverty, where they pursued free market capitalist solutions. China is another example. The economic reforms of the late 1970s. All of these independent metrics are pointing to the fact that we have reduced poverty. And what are we doing with Indigenous communities? The policies of Nicaragua, the policies of Venezuela, where we saw increased poverty, socialist policies that incentivize poverty. They have not worked for Indigenous communities. Thank goodness there are people like Chief Willie Sellers. Thank goodness there are people like Chief Michael Labradee who are opposing this. They're saying actually capitalism is what worked. And they're adopting these policies where we see a reduction in poverty. And what are they promoting? Consultation with local communities. We need to have environmental protections is what they're saying. We need to have economic development. You want to have an economic development plan, that's fantastic, but I've got 600 people that need to go to work. Can you provide jobs for them? That's fantastic as well. Now, what sort of environmental protections do we have? These are the sorts of solutions that I envision that are inclusive in terms of consultation.
Thank you very much, Brandon. June.
Yes. Our party commits to in implementing all 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, supports implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People without changes. And fundamentally, we support a new relationship between the nations in this land that includes the right to self-determination up to and including secession for all nations, Acadiens, Québécois, all Indigenous nations. We want to draft a new democratic constitution based on a new equal voluntary partnership of all Indigenous peoples and all settler nations. We want to replace the Senate with a so-called House of Nationalities that would have guaranteed representation for all the nations in this land. And we want to enforce Indigenous treaty hunting and fishing rights in Atlantic Canada. We don't want to see what we saw in Nova Scotia these past summers with the burning of Indigenous built lobster fisheries. And we want to guarantee Indigenous people's rights to full, free, prior and informed consent to all development, including resource extraction, pipelines, or anything affecting their land or water or livelihoods. And of course, we want to remove vestiges of colonialism from all federal legislation. We want to act now for a just settlement of all land claims, including resource sharing agreements, but most importantly, without any extinguishment of inherent Indigenous title. Yeah.
Thank you very much, June. Jenica, on Indigenous rights.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this question. And I used to teach, with my little UNDRIP kind of brochure. My stepfather went to the United Nations, was a part of those negotiations as well. And it's really exciting to see that it was brought into legislation for our government. I think it's a big step forward. I'd like to say though, in my role as a member of parliament, in bringing the voice of Fredericton forward to Ottawa, I consulted with Ormocto First Nation, with St. Mary's First Nation, with the Willistook Grand Council and traditional government. I also consulted with Kingsclear First Nation. They're right on the cusp, but I always include them in our beautiful riding. And they had a lot of concerns. They had a lot of concerns with the top-down approach. They had concerns with being left out of the consultation process, which should be enshrined in the bill itself. They had concerns that it was very pan-indigenizing again, that it didn't account for much diversity. So I put forward critical amendments to what was presented as far as the UNDRIP legislation, including inclusive language as well, to be more recognizing or more in acknowledgement of two-spirited individuals as well. So there's lots of pieces to this that I think could be improved. And again, without having Indigenous people's voices enshrined up front, it took away a little bit from the credibility of the bill. And so while I'm in full support of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, I think we have a long way to go to see that it's fully implemented in Canada. It's going to take the inclusion of Indigenous voices up front again and not as an afterthought, nothing about them without them. It's got to be, you know, I can't believe I have to keep saying that as well. And so it's interesting. I have you know, I've had quite an experience with this piece of legislation. So I hope, again, it's opening up conversations, really to moving away from the Indian Act. I think that's the key piece that really UNDRIP could open the door for. But again, Indigenous people need to lead this process, and we need to stop telling them from Ottawa, you know, how it's going to roll. So interesting answer perhaps, but that's really how I feel about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenica. Shawn, the screen is yours on Indigenous rights.
Thank you very much. First things first, can everybody get clean drinking water? Every Canadian get clean drinking water? Can we start there? This is such an important topic, and I'm coming up to speed, so I have to refer to my notes if you'll excuse me. The Liberals and Conservatives have failed Indigenous peoples time and again. The relationship has been deeply troubled. There's talks about reconciliation, promises to respect Indigenous rights, but instead spends millions of dollars fighting First Nations kids in court. Promises clean drinking water, delivers just more delays. Now saying it won't happen until 2026. So what until then? We need the nation-to-nation relationship, a true relationship, reconciliation, recognition, Indigenous rights, and equal funding. And to refer to the NDP plan, it's safe housing, clean drinking water now, respectful and safe access to healthcare. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Nicole, you're the final speaker on Indigenous rights.
Great. Yeah, I teach 2 courses on this, so I got 2 minutes. Let's see what I can do. Yeah, I mean, the UNDRIP is very important. So is the TRC. Of course, I'm committed to those 2 things. The problem is we've got jurisdictional issues. And when it comes to free, prior, and informed consent, recalcitrant provincial governments do not want to give even 1 more acre up to what they consider to be First Nations. They think it's a federal responsibility. That we've seen this fight going on for 150 years. Okay, so one of the problems we have should be addressed by the fact that we patriated our Constitution in 1982, and we recognized Aboriginal and treaty rights as being a meaningful part of the social contract of this country. That being said, we have not figured out a way to take control and administration of public lands away from provincial governments and federal government and give it to Indigenous peoples in a meaningful way. Because until we get self-government and Section 35 of the Constitution acting in coordination with Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution, so we have 3 orders of government, until we get to Indigenous people playing a meaningful constitutional role, like we recognized in 1982, we're not going to be able to have meaningful Indigenous land use planning acts or First Nations decision-making in any meaningful way. We've got to get down to the root of the problem here. And the fact is the Constitution, we recognized Aboriginal and treaty rights, but we have not implemented them. We do not have a way to manifest them in any real, meaningful, or effective way. And bringing in outside documents like the UNDRIP is really, really great, except it provides for free, prior, and informed consent, which the provinces are not going to agree with. So there's the constitutional conundrum. It's the challenge of our times, and we all have to take it seriously, because actually the future of the country depends on us figuring this out.
And that was 2 minutes exactly, Nicole. Okay, we are moving now to the 5th question. It's on leadership. It's a yes/no question, no more than a 30-second response. So the question is, will you join the All-Party Climate Caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions? June, you're our first speaker.
Well, I suppose if elected, I might. I don't know exactly how, what good would come out of cooperating with the Conservative Party, or even the Liberal Party for that matter, on these climate issues, because I don't believe that, I don't think the actions of both of these parties in government have proven that they may, admit that climate change is a real thing, but their actions betray otherwise.
Thank you very much, June. Jenica, 30 seconds.
Thank you. And yes, I would absolutely commit to joining an all-party caucus on climate change. It's something I've done many times, but there is a lot of actually, June, there's some great things that can come out of the all-party caucuses. I was on the ALS caucus, the mental health caucus, the diabetes caucus. It's a great way to make it a nonpartisan issue, to come together. The youth of this country want to see us collaborate on this. I've got to say, we have to stop kind of waving the certain flags that we have and thinking nobody else can help. We all need to help each other. Collaboration is key. Absolutely, I would join an all-party caucus.
Thank you very much, Jenica. Shawn, will you join an all-party caucus on climate change?
Yes, absolutely. NDP MP Matthew Green is backing this. It's who I would get my information through. And of course, my daughter keeps pressuring me to learn for this. I saw his TikTok video. I've never been to the UN. I have never taught law. So as a letter carrier, I'm trying to get up to speed with all the people here who don't need to take so many notes.
Thanks very much, Shawn. Nicole, 30 seconds.
Yeah, we've got an environmental crisis on our hands. And if you want to give it a parallel to maybe World War I, when we had a union government where everybody came together, all parties were planning for war and how to actually deal with it. That's the scope of the crisis. And I know it sounds apocalyptic when I say it, but we have 8 years to figure this out. We have been fooling around for so long that the time to act is now. We need all hands on deck. We need to clear away some of that.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Brandon, will you join an all-party caucus?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 30% rate of return last quarter in my green tech investments, 117% the year before the last election. Be happy to share some of that wisdom and knowledge. I'm on the board of directors for Smart Grid Innovation Network, and be happy to disseminate some of that. Right now, we were having an election. We had one provincially because some governments cannot work with minority parties, which I think that's a tragedy. But I'd be happy to do my best.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Okay, so we're now moving to a different sort of questions. These questions were generated by or collected by Nature NB and UNB from New Brunswickers. These questions don't come from the top down. These questions come from the bottom up. So question number 6. The majority of New Brunswickers currently rely on the burning of fossil fuels to heat their homes and offices, to fuel their vehicles, to power manufacturing, and more. We know that fossil fuels are both a key source of pollution and a finite resources. What will you do to support the growth of sustainable energy infrastructure, such as wind, solar, tidal, and more in New Brunswick? And the first speaker will be Jenica.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this question. There's so much we can do to support solar, wind, geothermal. It's all about diversifying. I think that's an important first step that we even acknowledge that, because that hasn't been happening for quite some time. We obviously need to phase out coal completely. Really, we need an accurate picture again of our energy needs. So they're all about home retrofitting. There's pieces in the platform to help fund that as well. Commercial retrofitting as well. We have to have a better idea of what we're actually dealing with. And this is before we go down the small modular nuclear reactor lane, because I think that's further down the road, and really those renewables industries are ready to go right now. There's incredible local companies who operate in solar and wind and geothermal. I'm also a big fan of river turbines. I think there's a way we can utilize our incredible river strength as well. Tidal. There's so many things that we could be doing. Passive energy heating for our homes as well. So it's about getting excited about it. It's about understanding that our environment and our economy are inextricably tied together, and that we can grow and prosper while we're also tackling the climate crisis. So I've been so excited to learn and meet with so many organizations, private businesses as well, individuals who are doing different things in their homes. It's an exciting time. This is a transformation time, and I think if we really harness that, and especially as elected officials, it's about providing that space. It's about ensuring that their information is shared, that it's getting out there, and that we incentivize people to really get on board and to make the changes in their own personal lives as well, because there's a role to play for government, but of course there's a role to play for us as individuals. So yeah, there's so much we can do, but there's a lot of opportunity here in New Brunswick, and we really need to harness that. And I just shout out to all those incredible businesses that are really growing and leading the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenica. The next speaker is Shawn. What will you do to support the growth of sustainable energy infrastructure such as wind, solar, tidal, and more in New Brunswick?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. Our plan to cut emissions by more than half and meet the 1.5 degree target. I'm going through this at my home, switching our heating over. So being pushed by my daughter to address this, and basically, as long as we make the proper steps to move forward, I'm happy.
Okay, thanks so much, Shawn. The next speaker is Nicole. What will you do to support a sustainable energy infrastructure in New Brunswick?
Well, the problem is so big that really only the federal government has got the policy levers that we need to get some movement on this. We can talk about all sorts of, and the speakers already have mentioned small little things that can happen here and there that pop up, right? Passive homes, different buying the Tesla, all those things. But we're really past that. So what can the federal government do? They can coordinate interprovincial grids and whatnot, right? The federal government has been so worried about getting into things with the provinces. And I mean, Stephen Harper even quit having federal provincial meetings on various issues. Well, we need to reinvigorate that. We need to be talking about things in a much bigger way than just province by province. So I'll give you an example. When it comes to Hydro-Quebec, putting that into some kind of Atlantic grid, all of Hydro-Quebec is so huge, and the amount of power that they can generate, we can really put that into a much bigger system if we're not always just thinking province by province. You need a federal government to coordinate and really move those kind of conversations along. They have the constitutional authority to do that. They just haven't been using it. We live in a very decentralized country right now. We really need, when it comes to a problem like COVID that doesn't obey boundaries, the environmental crisis that doesn't obey boundaries, that's where a strong federal government needs to play a much stronger role in coordinating it and taking on recalcitrant provinces who say, no, our energy policy has to be separate or competing with various provinces. It doesn't need to be that way. It can be a much more coordinated thing. We also need to look at carrots and sticks, right? So we need incentives so that individual consumers can do the quote unquote right thing, but also we need enforcement to get at the heavy polluters, right? And industry that are not following the rules as well.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Brandon, what will you do to support the growth of sustainable energy infrastructure in New Brunswick?
Well, I think we have to take the paradigm, we have to turn it on its head. Right now, the situation is let's tax the hell out of everybody, and then we'll put these dollars. This is not true. What we actually do is put the dollars towards fossil fuel companies. But what the paradigm, falsely so called, is that we'll tax everybody, and then we'll put these tax dollars towards green tech initiatives. And unfortunately, when I take a look at the resume of everybody that's making the decisions, the decision makers on these projects, they have no record of success in green tech projects. There's nothing on their resumes that says they're going to be making a successful decision. What I'd like to see is a tax cut policy. So if you are going green with electric vehicles, with solar, with geothermal, etc., you get a tax write-off because of that. Now, why is that better? Because you're playing roulette the other way. You may or may not have a government bureaucrat that's making a sound decision. Probably not, because there's nothing on their resume. Now, when you have a tax cut that's going towards green tech and the consumer makes the decision for what's in their best interest, 100% of those forfeited revenues goes to companies that have a successful product that can be brought to market and can be successfully sold. 100%. That's the free market. That's the natural selection of free market capitalism. We get rid of the crap that doesn't work and we only focus on the stuff that does work. When 100% of those forfeited revenues goes to successful green tech companies, we win. The economy wins. We have winning companies, companies that can provide jobs. When you play roulette, you could just be flushing money down the toilet and nobody wins with that. So I want to see a massive paradigm shift.
Thank you so much, Brandon. The final speaker will be June. What will you do to support energy infrastructure, green energy infrastructure in New Brunswick?
Well, much like Nicole mentioned, the Communist Party supports building a national east to west power grid for the entire country. To include production, distribution, transmission, and bulk electricity system market. This would all be under public ownership, democratic control, but in a more local sense, we also support major federal funding for publicly owned and electric intercity buses. And we need to reduce our reliance on cars in this province. You know, for most people, the only way to get between point A and point B, no matter where you are in this province, is via a personal automobile. We want to see a national intercity bus service take the place of unreliable private actors like Greyhound and Coach Atlantic and so on and so forth. And we need reliable, free to use transportation between and within our cities if we want to reduce pollution from personal automobiles. We also want to rebuild our publicly owned power utilities and make sure that all new energy development is under public democratic control. We don't think we need to have private middlemen, making a buck off what should be a public utility. Power generation is the business of the people, in my opinion. I don't want to see any soft privatization of our power systems by introducing these private actors who are only in it to make money.
Okay, thank you so much, June. We are proceeding apace, and I thank our candidates for being so efficient in their answers. Question number 7. What will be your immediate priorities with regards to the environment in New Brunswick within the first 100 days of taking office? The first speaker is Shawn.
Well, we have on our platform, we have to take care of the big polluters. We got to let them pay their fair share to get this in gear. Last year, Trudeau gave almost $2 billion in subsidies for this, but there's no real definite plan to fix this. So again, I'm referring to my notes, and according to our platform, which I obviously stand by, cutting the emissions by more than half to meet the 1.5 degree target and create hundreds of thousands of good paying jobs, but do it now. So when you say the 100 days, I would start day one to get this in action. We've waited long enough. There's 2 governments who have waited long enough. It's time for a change.
Thank you so much, Shawn. The next speaker is Nicole. In the first 100 days, what will be your priorities with regards to the new environment in New Brunswick?
Well, I'd like to hammer out a federal provincial agreement on the meaning of treaty rights in the 21st century. Until we do that, we're to keep going round and round. I give you, for an example, the shale gas protests in 2013, where the provincial government gave a license to explore for shale gas to an American company, and the First Nations took to the highways and blockaded it. That's a real problem. We have unextinguished Aboriginal title to all the lands in New Brunswick. What does that mean? We need to figure out what that means with respect to federal provincial relations, but incorporating First Nations into meaningful self-government of the territory that we're talking about. The uncertainty is a constant problem. And if we're going to move forward together here in New Brunswick, we have to get some of these underlying big constitutional questions addressed so that we're on the same page, so we can move forward together. Because right now, anytime the government suggests any kind of development, because we haven't addressed the underlying issues, there's protests, there's breakdown in talks, there's frustration, there's lack of trust, and we're not getting anywhere at all, okay? So that's what I by priority in the first 100 days. And again, there's been a lot of study of this. So much academic work has already been done. We've had the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples talking about how to implement a nation-to-nation relationship in a meaningful way. We just need the political will to do it. That would be my priority in the first 100 days, so that we can get on the same page and we can move forward, because we're not going to have the policies in place to address the environmental crisis if we keep running into all these protests, mistrust, broken treaty promises, etc.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Brandon, the first 100 days, what will your priorities be?
Good question. I think the number one issue has got to be the subsidies. For me, as a green tech investor, it's not just laying the foundation for the infrastructure for things like geothermal. After you have lost those sunk fixed costs, you then have to compete on the variable costs. The biggest barrier for green tech taking off right now are the subsidies. And I've seen a lot of numbers thrown out. I don't want to name names, but Shawn and Nicole, you got your numbers wrong. It's $18 billion. We've seen $13 billion alone coming from EDC in terms of forgivable loans to fossil fuel companies. This has got to go. This is not acceptable. This is 5 times worse than what Stephen Harper was giving to fossil fuel companies. He didn't even dream. I think his rationale was that politically you can't do this. And Trudeau was thinking, okay, well, I can get away with this because I talk like I'm, I play an environmentalist on TV, but I'm not really one. It's that sort of mentality. But this is the thing that's the biggest barrier for us to transitioning to green energy. I can tell you, as somebody who sits on the board of directors of SGIN, I can tell you as a green tech investor, this is the thing that we cannot compete because of the billions and billions of dollars that are going to fossil fuel companies that makes us uncompetitive. I'd love to see the price point be far more favorable to green tech, but unfortunately that's not the situation that we're in. So my first 100 days in office, I can tell you the number one priority is the number one barrier preventing us from going green, and the number one barrier are the fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you very much, Brandon. The next speaker is June, the first 100 days. What will your priorities be in regards to the environment in New Brunswick?
Well, in regards to the environment, I think a good place to start, of course, looking to end the spraying of glyphosate in our forests is a big issue. But I would also like to push for the nationalization of natural resources and resource extraction in this country, because not only would that be a great way to confront polluters on a national scale, it would also confront polluters on a local scale. By finally confronting the power of the Irving cartel in this province. Le Monde Diplomatique described the economic and media situation in New Brunswick as unique in the first world for how concentrated ownership of capital is in this province. It is unparalleled almost anywhere else in the developed world. Of course, it's well known that all of our English language media is owned by, English language print media is owned by one family. They also own, of course, oil refineries, large tracts of forest, essentially, although we're told it's crown land. And also, transportation, manufacturing, lots of other things we don't even know about because they are still a private company, not publicly listed. So their finances are even more opaque than usual. By putting forward a national plan to confront these large polluters, I think we can do a lot for New Brunswick by finally breaking the power of these large corporations that I think have really been holding us hostage economically and socially for honestly hundreds of years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, June. The final speaker is Jenica. What will be your priorities in the first 100 days in regards to New Brunswick's environment?
Excellent, thank you. And you know, I mean, I have to kind of take the same angle as Nicole in that we really need to have better relations with Indigenous, non-Indigenous peoples in our province, and a big piece of that is I think Indigenous protected conservation areas. I think it's a really incredible transformative way to bridge some of these conversations as well, and to return power back to Indigenous voices on conservation issues. There's amazing modeling that's happening in the West Coast, and there's a East-West connection that's really trying to bridge those conversations. So I would really, really love to continue to broker that here in the province and see Indigenous protected conservation areas really take off. Again, it's about empowering communities, and that connection to land is a huge, important way to do that. My children are Wolastoq-Galyag, that this is part of their identity. It's for future generations. So that's something specific I can think about for New Brunswick's environment. I would also be retabling my private member's bill on glyphosate, continuing those conversations with the health minister to, restudy to ensure that, we're looking at this from every angle, because again, our health outcomes in New Brunswick versus what we could have with this beautiful landscape just don't align. And so that's a serious, serious issue for me. I really, really need to continue to address the herbicide and pesticide use in this province, because I think it's leading to so many other issues. So, 100 days is a shorter time than you think in Parliament. So I think that I'll focus on those two for now, as far as environment for New Brunswick, but lots of other priorities as well. And certainly, Brandon, ending those emissions is critical. I am proud to have that commitment by 2023 that they will be finished, but we're capping them immediately in those first 100 days as well. So thanks so much. Great question.
Thank you, Jenica. That brings us to question number 8. In 2020, the federal government announced that a selection of single-use plastics would be banned in 2021. But the end of the year is fast approaching. Will you support the acceleration of this plan to ensure that grocery bags, straws, stir sticks, six-pack rings, cutlery, and takeout containers made from single-use, non-recyclable plastic are banned by the end of this year, 2021? Nicole, the screen is yours.
Yeah, it's easy to be in the Green Party. Again, I'm going to say yes, of course, we need to do that. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, we need to shift to an economy in which waste of all types is absolutely minimized, right? So the problem is excessive consumption, excessive packaging, takeout culture. We need right to repair legislation. We need dumps and regional recycling facilities to actually charge people a rate that disincentivizes the amount that we throw out. We need to talk seriously about glass recycling, and it's not enough of an excuse to just say, well, there's no market for these goods anymore. We need to find markets, right? We need to build up the products and the things that can be used and reused and recycled. So I applaud the going to stir sticks and no straws and all this kind of stuff, but when we've got 8 years to really turn this whole ship around to avoid the iceberg, I think we need to be thinking a lot bigger. So yes, of course I support this, but is this just the end of the conversation? And that's what I'm really worried about, is that you often see the Conservatives and the Liberals bring in something small, looks good, and then they say, okay, we're done with the problem now. Okay, this needs to just be the start of a much bigger attempt to get at the waste culture and the consumerism and how we deal with it in a meaningful way.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Brandon, will you support the phasing out of single-use plastics?
Well, I would support tort reform, for example, where we can hold people, where we can hold corporations responsible for the cleanup in the oceans. Like I was saying before, I mean, the current model is let's just tax everybody and then we'll pay for the cleanup. The government will pay for the cleanup. Well, my problem with that is I don't use a whole lot of plastics, so I'm a little bit pissed off with that. I recycle. I don't use a whole lot of plastics to begin with. When I do, I recycle. I don't know how much of that translates into positive outcomes for the environment, but that's the way it is. So why is it that I have to pay for the cleanup of plastics in the ocean when you have slothfulness going on? You have people who have zero concern for whether or not their plastics wind up in the ocean or landfills, et cetera. I have to pay the same amount. I don't like that. What I like to see is tort reform, where people who are using plastics, people who are producing plastics, they're the ones who have to pay for the cleanups of plastics in the ocean. That's what I like to see. Users and producers pay for the external costs that they impose onto society. So I'd love to see cleanups happen. This is a fantastic thing. And I'd love to see the incentives happen whereby the cost of cleanup is intrinsic to the price of plastics. I'd love to see something like that happen. So what we need for that is to eliminate this communist crap, this public good legislation that we've had for years and years and years, decades and decades and decades, where polluters are protected. So let's get rid of that and let's allow a judge to make a judgment and say, you, the plastic producer, have to pay for the cost of cleanup of plastics in the ocean. This is the best case scenario in my judgment.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Well, pursuant to your reference to communist, June, the screen is yours. Will you support the phase out of single-use non-recyclable plastic by the end of the year?
Yes, our platform includes an entire point, transition to a zero waste economy. We want to set higher standards for product design, reduce the amount of packaging, improve labeling and collection after use to improve waste diversion toward recycling programs. And also we need to stop thinking that there needs to be some sort of profit motive or private incentive in recycling. It needs to be treated as a public utility. Things that can be recycled should be recycled. It doesn't matter if somebody can get rich off it. I don't care. You know, but also in terms of other wasteful practices, it is not just a matter of individuals, you know, stopping their use of straws or whatever, even though all of this stuff is of course bad for the environment. The real polluters, and this is in terms of even plastic waste and such, that these are industrial sources, large corporations usually, and ones that you know, large polluters that we wouldn't bring under public control under our plan would be subject to strict fines and strict punishments were they found to be you know, being excessively wasteful. So yeah, this does need to be part of a larger plan to reduce the amount of waste in the overall economy, not just targeting the habits of individuals. Although I do think that these wasteful packaging practices and use of unrecyclable plastics and hydrocarbons should probably be phased out immediately.
Okay, thank you very much, June. Jenica, will you support the banning of single-use plastics by the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, of course. But again, to many of the points that have been made, it's certainly just the tip of the iceberg. I think a lot about, again, if we're phasing out fossil fuels, we have to talk about petrochemicals as well. So hopefully that will go hand in hand. I would really like to see an incentivized program for, you know, alternative packaging. So there's hemp you can make packaging out of, you can make avocado pits, there's banana leaves. We can get really creative and really tackle this head on and kind of get excited about it too. I'd love to see New Brunswick really see some businesses retool and become a leader in this. So certainly something that I would absolutely absolutely support. But there's obviously convenience and accessibility issues. That's why we need to look at a different way of doing it. But we're talking about the plastic island, the majority of the plastic island that's floating out there is fishing gear. So there's a whole other issue that we need to address. And you're right, Nicole, in that sometimes a campaign is really fun to talk about, let's ban plastic straws, but is that really going to address the major issue? So actually a bigger carbon sink is in the ocean. So if we could protect against, harmful bycatch, for example, or entanglements, then those whales and dolphins are going to be doing their own job in becoming carbon sinks for us. So it's multifaceted, but absolutely I would support, the banning of single-use plastics. But I really think it's going to take a concerted effort. It's going to take businesses really confronting how they've been contributing to this, the fast food industry, the beverage industry. I remember having there was a lobby group for Coca-Cola that came and met with me, and you wouldn't believe the lines that they have to actually say that they're leaders in eliminating plastic waste. It's mind-boggling. So this is what we're up against. So it's about being honest and real. It's about individual changes, yes, but about incentivizing businesses to get on board. The time is now. So complicated answer, yes, absolutely, but much more needs to be done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenica. And the final speaker to this question is Shawn. Will you support the banning of single-use plastics?
Absolutely, yes. And also thank you, June, for mentioning the Irvings, the NB environment issues. Yeah, that's got to be talked about. Thank you for that. In my home, my daughter has us using reusable items and getting rid of plastics, and we didn't realize exactly how wasteful we were. We were originally a family of 5. There was a lot of plastic. And I see how over relied we are on the plastics. And yeah, it's got to be addressed. And if people really care about it, when we come together, we can fix this. And it would be great if we came together and new government had our back. They were working with us, not working against us secretly. And including the climate crisis. So with the NDP, this is our platform. This is how we work. We are normal working people looking out for normal working people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shawn. Okay, we've come to our final question. What measures do you think should be taken to limit the use of glyphosate, given that this herbicide has been banned in several countries due to its effects on the environment? The first speaker is Brandon.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment because a lot of people take a look at libertarian capitalism and they say, oh, well, you're just in the interests of X, Y, and Z companies. And that's really not the case. What we believe in is the non-aggression principle. And I want to explain why I believe in bans and things like glyphosate. So what is a libertarian? A libertarian, imagine you have some sort of a weapon. Let's say you have a gun and you see a murder taking place. Would you use the gun to prevent the murder? I would. Let's say you see some sort of an assault taking place, like a perverse assault on someone you care about. Would you use the gun to prevent that? I would. What about a theft? I don't know that I'd use the gun in that case, but I would probably try to scare the criminal and say, don't cart away with my valuables. What about to build a skating rink? Would you take out a gun, point it at somebody and say, give me your money, I want to build a skating rink? Every single expenditure that the government has got to bear in mind the fact that we take the money by force. If you don't pay your taxes, at first your wages get garnished, and then eventually guys with guns show up and they take your money. So taxation is done by force. We don't like that. Libertarians are against the use of force, whether it's to build a skating rink or whether it's pollution so much to the extent that it makes the planet uninhabitable, whether it's facilitating the sale of weapons to carry out a genocide, the northern part of North Yemen with the Saudi arms deal. We're opposed to all of that. We're against the use of force. If somebody's building a business, good for them. We don't want to stop them unless they're hurting other people. Glyphosate is an example of people hurting other people. They're hurting the ecosphere. We're against it. This is the non-aggression principle. This is the libertarian philosophy in a nutshell. I do support banning anyone that's hurting anyone else, and glyphosate does hurt other people.
Thank you so much, Brandon. June, the screen is yours.
Yes, immediate measures should be taken to ban glyphosate. I honestly think that we're going to look back at how long we used glyphosate in this province and look back with similar hindsight as the widespread use of DDT. It had widespread poor consequences on human health and animal health throughout the United States and Canada during its use. Under the communist plan, glyphosate would immediately be phased out. One, because crown lands should be treated like crown lands. They are publicly owned, and we can decide what happens on them. And also large-scale resource extraction like forestry would be brought under public democratic control. So we could end the use of these harmful chemicals by industry immediately. But also kind of related, we also want to ban the use of terminator seeds and other genetically engineered crops that don't produce their own seeds and force farmers to come back and buy from the source once again. So we would push back against the power of these large agribusinesses and resource companies to, yes, ban glyphosate spraying in this province.
Thank you so much, June. Jenica, glyphosate.
Great, thank you. An excellent question. I've very passionate about this issue. It's something that I've been involved with for many years now. My family's been very involved with it as well. Absolutely, I would retable my private member's bill, but beyond that, commit to a larger, broader government acknowledgement of the issues that New Brunswickers are experiencing here with glyphosate. It is still approved by Health Canada, but really the other piece of it is that there's habitat loss. There's biodiversity that's getting compromised. Our hardwoods, there's ash trees are culturally significant, just as an example. Aspen as well are natural fire breakers. So there's other harmful ways and reasons to eliminate our use of glyphosate beyond Health Canada's approval that apparently it's not hurting us in our health. But again, I'm looking for that study to be reconducted. I have already raised the eyebrows of the Irvings. I've already raised the eyebrows of Bayer, the company who has bought Monsanto as well. So I'm doing what I can to rattle some cages. I think that's what we really need to do on this issue. And again, most people in Canada don't know what we're dealing with here in the East Coast with glyphosate use. They think about agricultural uses. Blueberries is a big one that we hear a lot, but the way it's sprayed on us, aerial spraying for forestry applications and for those line maintenance for MB Power, very serious. And June, you mentioned other oxides. I've also been heavily involved with brats in the battlefield and in their fight against Agent Orange exposure, and that turned into glyphosate use. So it shouldn't be shocking that we're having all kinds of problems with this. We're seeing in the United States, and it's cropping up here now. We have the leadership as well of municipalities. Montreal, for example, the mayor Valérie Laplante already leading the way on this and showing us that she's not going to accept this in her municipality. So, it's starting to change. I have optimism. I have hope. We're finally getting there. 30,000 New Brunswickers signed a petition to say we don't want this anymore. We don't want our taxpaying dollars to go to this. So this is a critical issue. So thankful we're all talking about this now. We must ban glyphosate use in New Brunswick and across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenica. Shawn, glyphosate.
Yes, absolutely. Stop spraying. It's crazy how now I can't go with my family. We cannot go safely into any property and pick the fruit, fiddleheads, berries, what have you, and be sure that it's safe. It's got to stop. We know who's doing it. The Irvings are spraying. They'll spray in the middle of the night. They don't advertise they're spraying. So who would know they were ever there? Well, you'll find out when you get sick. We can't swim in our rivers because it's polluted. We have algae. Why is it there? It needs to stop, and we know who's doing it. So, and they need to have a government. We need to have a government who's going to stand up to them. Because if you vote for me, I don't work for Irving. The only goal I have is to make this country better for my kids and your kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Nicole, you are our final speaker on this question. Glyphosate spraying.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it should be deregistered and then banned. But again, it's just the tip of the iceberg, like the last question. I grew up in a farm family in Saskatchewan, and my father actually sued Monsanto. So when I was growing up, I learned all about chemical companies and the lobbying and the control that they have on individual farmers. we've heard a little bit about tort law reform tonight, thanks to Brandon. I'd just like to point out that private law has its limits. It can only have money for damages. When you get into public law, which is where the government can play a much bigger role, the enforcement regime, there are many more tools in the toolkit. So when we're dealing with really big problems, leaving it to private actors and private law remedies is very, very limited. So I'd ask everybody to think bigger into the world of public constitutional law. We really ultimately, though, need to move away from chemical management of forests and agriculture and promote a really aggressive transition program to sustainable and low impact organic forestry practices and agricultural practices. So glyphosate banning is one step along, hopefully a longer trajectory where we're looking at the bigger picture here. And I propose we need to start talking about sustainable forest and agriculture legislation to deal with the bigger problems, because companies and corporations with the profit incentive have been many steps ahead along the way, and government needs to catch up. They need the legislative regimes that will enforce meaningful controls and regulatory authority over private enterprise, because our resources and our children's future are being diminished. Our health is being sacrificed for the profit of a very few. I didn't want to say the word Irving here tonight, but they're prime examples. We need to think differently.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And that brings our questions and answers to an end. I'd like now to invite the candidates to make a short 2-minute concluding statement. And again, the order was generated well in advance. June, you will be first.
Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to thank the organizers of the debate for inviting me, and also all of my fellow candidates for showing up and for your interesting perspectives. But anyway, like this past summer has seen record-breaking heat waves, discovery of thousands of unmarked graves of Indigenous children, and growing threats of war around the world, along with the COVID pandemic and the accompanying economic crisis. Together, these have caused over 26,000 deaths in Canada, brought our healthcare system to the verge of collapse, and have left millions of people unemployed or precariously employed. And we don't believe that the government of Justin Trudeau or any major party is seriously offering up the policies and the vision that we need to really get out of this this crisis. I believe that continued human sustainability on this planet is incompatible with capitalism. It's a system that requires endless growth. It's the system that has gotten us to this point, this dangerous tipping point that we're already at. We need to change course. A socialist society is the aim of the Communist Party of Canada. We believe it's urgent and worth fighting for. And I'm just asking you to, this election, vote for your own interests and vote for a party that puts people's needs and rights ahead of corporate greed and the rights of the rich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, June. Jenica, your concluding remarks.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Excellent discussion. I knew it would be. Thank you to my fellow candidates as well. It's always great to join each other for these discussions. Thank you to the UNB Nature Trust again, UNB Sustainability, Green PAC as well. Whoever is elected as our MP, Green PAC has an incredible internship program. I was given 2 amazing interns over my time in Ottawa. Just like to give a shout out to them as well. Thank you as well to our moderator, Professor Wright. You were one of my political science professors and you're part of this journey for me. So thank you again for keeping us punctual and on time. I also would like to take this opportunity. I didn't get a chance to reaffirm my commitment in that I am in opposition of the TMX pipeline. I've made it very clear to my Liberal colleagues that that is the case. I am still fighting to change the narrative that is the way we're going to finance this transition to a green economy. I think that we're already well on our way. We don't need to have a publicly funded pipeline as well. So I just really wanted to be clear on that piece. We've had a lot of discussion today about a lot of different issues. Again, glyphosate is hugely important to me. I will continue to fight on that line as well, supporting Indigenous protected conservation areas and the Indigenous voice. I really like what Nicole said as well about coordinating interprovincial grids. I think that's an excellent piece that I would like to move forward and take with me as well. SEPA, again, a right to a healthy environment. This needs to be enshrined in law. I was also part of an international coalition of individuals fighting to have ecocide made illegal as well. So along the same lines, this is something that's incredibly important to me. It's important to my children. It is important to my grandchildren. It's about future generations. Every decision government makes has to have future generations in mind. That is my personal commitment. And I look forward to potentially being your member of parliament again. It's been an incredible journey. I've learned so much. I know what it takes. I'm going to keep fighting for our environment. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenica. Shawn, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say thanks to you, Don and Jen at Nature NB for inviting me to this. I've got a lot of notes to go over tonight. Great information, everybody. You've helped me out, but I've got a lot of homework to do tonight. But really, the new Democrats are different than the other governments. We are working people for the working people. That's our history, and that is what we do. We know the good jobs that treat people fairly make a real difference to Canadian families, and that setting Canadians up for success in the work world of the future helps us all. New ways of thinking can shape the recovery from COVID-19. Would help make our economy fair and deliver the results we all want. And thank you so much. On September 20th, I hope you will consider me as your MP, Fredericton, because I am only going there to work on behalf of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shawn. Nicole, your concluding remarks.
Great. Okay, I'll reiterate the thank you. This has actually been a pleasant evening. I know we're all running around doing a lot of stuff right now, but it's really nice to actually engage in these kind of conversations. And I'm pretty sure that we're all going to keep talking now that we're getting to know each other, whoever gets elected on September 20th. So I'd like to thank everyone for that. I encourage all of you to look at the Green Party platform. The Green Party, of course, has been thinking about these issues in a comprehensive way for a very long time. And when it comes to the other parties, and I'm going to use the term greenwashing here, they like to talk a good game during election campaigns, and then the way they govern doesn't really follow through on it. When the Liberals say they need they need to own a pipeline in order to finance climate change mitigation strategies, like I just don't even know really what to do about that. And then of course the Conservatives are the party of big business, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the Conservative candidate is not here tonight. I don't think their position is any way defensible on any of the issues that we've talked about tonight. It would have been interesting to have that debate. And of course the NDPs, if you look at Rachel Notley when they were in government in Alberta, they're still driven by industry. They're still driven by the jobs first. And we really need to start thinking about the environment first, and much more in the public interest and in the collective interest. So we need a federal government that will play a much bigger role in enforcing meaningful and effective change and wrangling with the recalcitrant provincial governments. And let's move forward all together. We need to reverse the trend of being so decentralized that we can't really seem to do anything together. Why vote for me? I'll represent your interests on the floor of the House of Commons and in the media, and I won't stop asking questions, and I will push and I will push and I will do my best to change the conversation for all of our futures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Brandon, last but not least, your concluding remarks.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. I probably am least, but you know what? I appreciate it nonetheless. It's my distinct honor and privilege to correct the law professor, because I dislike lawyers and philosophers have a natural dislike of lawyers. Actually, tort reform, I think, is very, very important. We have to be taking a look at economically, because moral suasion has not worked. Let's face facts. Moral suasion has not worked on this issue. So what we have to be doing is appealing to people's pocketbooks. We have to have intrinsic cost to things like plastic pollution, to things like we have to be incentivized to go green. And so I would like to see tort reform on that front, where people are forced to pay for the cost of plastic cleanup. But there was one question that was raised, and I tried to address it ever so briefly, is this is the most important question you could possibly ask. What is your personal commitment to the environment? A lot of this is, yay, this is my opinion. I love hearing what they have to say, and I love hearing it come out of their mouth. But what is your actual personal commitment? For myself, I eat vegan. I don't drive a car. I don't have a electric or a gas powered lawnmower. I don't use a dryer. I use a manual push mower. I hang my clothes out on the line. I am a very environmentalist person. These are my principles. You can vote for somebody that shares your opinion. You can be very excited to hear your opinions come out of their mouth. And then when they get to office, you're going to find out what the real principles are. So what I would recommend doing is find out what their real principles are in advance. Where do they stand? And so take a tour of their house, find out how they are going green in their own personal lives. Thank you so much. I appreciate the attentiveness and I appreciate the inclusion. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you, one and all.
Okay, thank you very much, Brandon. I guess the floor is mine now for a few seconds. I've been asked to say a couple of thank yous. So first, a huge thank you, a huge shout out to the candidates, to Shawn, to Nicole, to Brandon, to Jenica, and to June. Again, I said, good on you, because I don't have the courage to put my name on the ballot. I don't even like departmental politics, faculty politics, but democracy demands that people step up, have the courage of their convictions, and speak to the public sphere. And you guys are doing it. So you're my heroes for the night. And then I want to thank too all the people who showed up and watched online. If democracy demands that people put their name on the ballot, democracy also demands that people show up, ask questions, listen, push back, and the give and take of conversation, debate. So thank you for coming. I want to give a special shout out to a 93-year-old woman from Ontario, my mother, who came to the debate tonight. She can't vote for any of you, but she has, I think, voted in every election since, I think, Mom, it was 1867 you cast your first ballot. But thank you for coming out. She has voted in every election. She has participated in every election, and I can remember knocking on doors and putting leaflets in boxes across Toronto growing up. So if she didn't give me my courage of my convictions to put my name on a ballot, she did give me my interest in politics. So thank you to the candidates. Thank you to the people who came. A shout out to my mother. How to vote, how to vote, how to vote. If you're not already registered, it's very easy. You can register in advance online. You can register on election day when you show up to vote. Election day, don't forget, is September 20. Polls open at 8:30 and they close at 8:30. Advance polls will be open September 10th to the 13th from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. each day. You can apply to vote by mail with a special ballot. That deadline is September 14th. You can vote in person by special ballot until, well, I guess this is past. This is old news. So I won't even say what it is. But if you're looking for information on where to vote, go to elections.ca, where to vote, how to vote, go to elections.ca, or go to the returning office at the Fredericton Hotel. This debate will be posted on YouTube in a couple of days on Nature NB's YouTube channel. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. Good luck to the candidates and like everyone else. And I think Fredericton is going to be a very interesting riding. My final point, I am often called by journalists. I have now been called by, I think, my 5th national journalist. What's going to happen in Fredericton? Who's going to win? What's the story? What's the buzz? Is there a big question, et cetera, et cetera. So I think on election night, we'll be watching, but the whole country will be watching this riding. So I wish you all the luck. And that's it.
Thanks so much to everybody. Just Jennifer from Nature NB checking in here at the end, just to let you know that I am going to end the call. Again, that's Nature NB on YouTube if you want to stream this back or send it to anybody who wasn't able to participate tonight. But we really appreciate everybody who signed on and asked questions and left comments in the chat. It was really appreciated. So everybody have a wonderful night. Thanks to all the candidates and everybody who made this evening possible. And thank you, Dawn, of course. See you, everybody.
Cheers. Good luck, everyone. Stay safe.